Janet Nodar. I am the Senior Editor for Breakbulk and Project Cargo with the Journal of Commerce and Chair of our annual JOC Breakbulk and Project Cargo Conference. Welcome to our educational session, the 411 on who does what in the project logistics supply chain. Project logistics differs from other types of logistics in significant ways, and this can be quite confusing for students or people who are new to the industry. So I'm talking today with two industry members who are extremely knowledgeable about the project logistics supply chain. With me are Dennis Matola, who recently retired from Bechtel, an EPC or engineering, procurement, and construction company. When he was with Bechtel, he was the head of global logistics for many years. I'm also here with John Hark, Director, North America with Bertling Logistics, which is a global freight forwarding firm that specializes in projects. John is also an adjunct professor at Texas A&M in Galveston, Texas, where he teaches on a variety of maritime topics, and he is very active in industry education. Thank you both for joining me today. I really appreciate it. To start off, we're going to talk about how and why the project EPC supply chain differs from other types of supply chains. What's the big deal? Dennis, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. So in the conversation about what's different, I think the first place to start is, who are the players? And you would have to look at, to begin with, how EPCs contract with their customers and how their customers might even be involved in supply chain. So we're gonna go way upstream and look at, to begin with, contracting arrangements, because in some cases, particularly cost reimbursable as opposed to lump sum contracting. In reimbursable, in some cases, the client could be involved in some of the purchasing decisions, and in fact, in some cases, have already purchased some of the major equipment items. So I would say that's a starting place. And then also with regard to, again, looking upstream, the other disciplines that are involved in project cargo supply chains, and that being primarily engineering. So procurement or supply chain has to engage much earlier in the process in the design phases of the equipment. And of course, in project supply chains, we are talking about a very significant spend on engineered type of equipment as opposed to stock items or off-the-shelf items. So those are major items to begin with. The players, who's involved, both externally and then internally.
Okay, all right, John.
Yeah, and to add on to that, when we have students that are coming out of the various supply chain programs, they do a lot of focus on consumer goods and last mile, auto logistics, chemical logistics. And that can be complicated, certainly when you throw in world events like the pandemic and trade sanctions and tariffs. But typically that's from developed countries to developed countries, more or less, and from set suppliers to set buyers. And when we contrast that with capital project logistics execution, we throw into that mix a lot of different suppliers of goods for a major capital project. The procurement team is purchasing oftentimes on a global basis to get the best product, let's say at the best price and the best schedule. So you've got many different origins. So it's very fractured in that sense. And then we also have, as Dennis mentioned, engineering involved in these long lead items. Yes, you could say that just-in-time inventories get complicated when world events happen, like the pandemic and the Texas freeze, and you can't find resin, but more or less you can get the same product, it's being manufactured. With these long lead items, it sometimes is taking years to build something, right, with the design and the building. So the care and custody of that cargo in the supply chain itself is very different, and the responsibility is much higher, and the risk is much higher if something happens. So you've got this multitude of suppliers, you've got the long lead items that have been engineered, sometimes over a matter of years. And then when we talk about the destinations, often capital projects or mining projects or refinery projects, and they may be in developing countries. And so we're not dealing in established trade lanes where we've got weekly container service or a weekly breakbulk service or weekly air freight service. Oftentimes we're establishing trade lanes for the startup, for the build part of the project. So that really sets it apart from other types of logistics and supply chain.
All right, and then just to underline the obvious, when we talk about the long lead items, the things that have to be manufactured, we're talking about massive components often of the various kinds of projects that would be being built, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Janet, let me just chime in on those items.
Okay.
You know, those are in a lot of cases one of a kind,
right.
You know, specially designed, custom designed for the particular purpose that they're going to be used for. And even from project to project for the same type of project, they can be different. The suppliers can be different. The supplier locations can be different. And then, of course, from job to job, this destination is going to be different. So you have a lot of variability from the outset, starting with design and who the suppliers are that are involved, to the whole ways to the job site, the manufacturing location, if you will, for the EPC world is the job site. And of course, that changes from job to job. And then even within a job, you have local conditions, weather conditions, of course, always affect problems with regard to remote locations. So that's what makes it different. That's what also makes it fun.
And then again, just to underline one point is if you have these long lead items and something happens to that item, it's not like you could just get another one off the shelf, right? You have to order it again. It could cost millions of dollars, right? So there's a lot of risk involved in that. All right, so can you define who the supply chain players are and what specific roles they play in managing the logistics piece of these logistics supply chains? John or Dennis, which one of you would like to start with this question?
I'll start, Janet. And again, looking upstream, again,
right.
to begin the conversation, the players that are involved are going to be contingent upon the purchase order or contract sales arrangements. So how is the supply chain organization, procurement, purchasing, whatever you want to call it, how are they buying items on what delivery terms? And so contingent upon what those terms are, whether they are what's called shipment sales contracts or delivery sales contracts in Incoterms lingo, you may have the material supplier involved, and different types of equipment are purchased on different delivery arrangements, whereby in the power industry, as an example, it's very typical that equipment for the very large power island equipment, as an example, are purchased on D terms, where they are delivered by the supplier the whole ways to the job site. So in that case, you have the supplier, the material equipment supplier, managing all of the decisions and all of the logistics to move the equipment that they are building, and contingent upon, you know, that could also be a fractured supply chain. So they could be originating shipments from multiple locations, but they're managing it from those locations to the job site. So that's the first piece of it. You know, the rest of it, John, maybe you want to chime in here and talk a little bit about the other players that are involved. Yeah.
And so I think when you take it from there, if we talk about the forwarder relationship, which is typically going to be, you know, with an EPC, right? They're contracting with an EPC. And as Dennis said, the EPC is buying different types of items, maybe on different terms, different purchase terms. Once they've got under their belt at the EPC what they're going to control themselves, they then decide, okay, what am I going to do in-house, potentially with my own staff, or am I going to let my freight forwarder handle the execution of? So in the fullest sense that a forwarder is involved, everything is turned over to the forwarder. So the forwarder is told what time this cargo is going to be available. Of course, on these long lead items and engineered items and large items, there's a lot of pre-planning, sometimes a couple of years in advance, both from a standpoint of inland domestic transportation as well as booking vessels, when we talk about the heavy lift vessels especially. And so the forwarder then also looks at his scope and he says, what am I doing in-house and what am I potentially subcontracting out? And of course, they're typically going to be subcontracting out to air carriers or to ocean carriers. You know, most forwarders don't own a bunch of assets. Some of us own some assets, but we don't own enough to be fully integrated and to do everything. And so we're contracting then with transport heavy lift and rigging operators, depending on the specialized type of cargo, warranty surveyors, right? The EPC, the project owner, has an insurance company, and we will interface then with surveyors to make sure everything's being done so that it doesn't jeopardize insurance cover. And if you go down shore from that, it's the longshoremen and stevedores and customs. And so all of these other players that sort of make it happen to get it, as Dennis said, from the supplier location to this job site, which could be in a developed country, but of course it could be 3,000 meters up in the Andes Mountains. That's very often left up to the forwarder to arrange and contract all of those services. So the forwarder will interface with all of those players, and sometimes in partnership with the EPC.
Okay, so it can be extraordinarily complicated, but as you said, very interesting as well.
Yes.
All right, so what is it that makes project and breakbulk cargo different from conventional dry cargo, and how do these differences, shape who is involved in the project supply chain? John, you want to start that one?
Yeah, so as Dennis said earlier, we've got long lead items, and so those are going to have a high amount of risk around them as far as just delivery to the job site. But in project cargo, we also tend to have heavy items, as we say, over width, over dimensional, and overweight. And those can't just be moved on the typical truck or on the typical ship. Yes, we will have plenty of just general cargo, so to speak. You know, we could have boxes on pallets of rebar chairs that hold up rebar at a job site. We could be moving just some office equipment for some trailers at a job site. But there's a lot of material that is going to be oversized and overweight that the EPC either is contracting to do on their own or entrusting the forwarder to move. And so it's a combination of the long lead time and the potential oversize and overweight nature of the cargo.
So when you're moving cargo for a project, you typically would have a mix of some things that could be containerized, some things that were some of these more specialized items, maybe some ro-ro cargo. Okay.
Yeah, and I would also add real quick with another role that goes on to the forwarder we call a line item checking, and that's due to the nature often of where these cargoes are going. You know, if a box gets there and it's not the right material, you can't very easily get the replacement there. Right. And so oftentimes the forwarder is actually opening boxes, you know, and the big giant items, engineering items, that's a different story, but we're very often actually confirming what we're shipping to this third world, potentially developing country is what the EPC or what our client ordered.
Okay. All right, Dennis?
Yeah, and to generally describe it, the cargo characteristics are such that they don't fit in a box, right? And so the overdimensional, overweight factor is, again, what makes it fun. But you're dealing with a whole group of different types of carriers, you know, specialized carriers, be that over the road, be that specialized rail transport requiring specialized cars for that. And then when you get into marine transportation, barge, heavy deck, roll on, roll off, roll on, roll off, float on, float off, heavy deck or heavy lift carriers. So a whole myriad of different types of carriers. And in some cases on shipments that I'll take very large pieces of equipment that are manufactured in Korea as an example. You could have 3 or 4 different types of carriers involved from the job site or from the manufacturing location to job site. So you may be dealing with a number of different carriers just on one shipment. That's a shipment within a purchase order. But the cargo characteristics are such that you need technical skills in addition to commercial skills to be able to make that happen. But again,
engineering.
Yeah, that's the fun of it, though.
All right. I think that's all of our questions that we were going to cover. Is there anything else that we need to add? No. It's
a very interesting career, and Dennis and I it certainly has treated us well, I would say, being in project and capital project logistics. So it's definitely a field that young people should look into going into.
Okay. All right.
I agree.
Thank you both very much. Really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you both soon.
Thank you.
Bye.